We got enough to roll with. Let's get started. So good afternoon, everybody. Happy first day of B-Sides. It is always so wonderful when this day comes. I do assist with some of the CTF development. In fact, one of the puzzles that you're probably interacting with is one that I built purely on my own. So that one actually has some automated Twitter functionality. So if somebody is successful in breaching the business to some extent, there may be some notifications going out publicly. So today we're going to spend some time on what happens after the business gets breached. So how does an organization clean up a breach? And then what we're going to do is we're going to play a game. So this is a game that I built. And the game is designed to teach you some incident response. So whether you've had any time in incident response or not, totally irrelevant. I walk you through everything. And we're just here to have a good time, learn a few things, and fortunately not actually lose out on the problems that we're about to face. So we'll just cover a bit of incident response basics so that we're all playing from the same sheet of music. I'll give you some insight into what it is that we're going to be spending our time doing today. And then we're going to play. And we'll open it up to some Q&A at the tail end of it. And we'll go from there. So a little about me. I've been in the business about 10-ish years. This is my fourth B-Sides Calgary fourth or fifth. The years have all started to run together. Anyway, I've been around since part of the beginning there, and it's been quite a ride ever since. So for whatever reason, I'm very interested in incident response. When I started my security career, this wasn't something very appealing because you tend not to have a regular schedule. It tends to be very panic-inducing, very high stress, especially when you are missing a lot of the core pieces that go into resolving an incident. And the managers are going, why don't we have this? Oh, because I told you 8 months ago this needed to be here and you said you'd rather buy new printers. Very common problem, very defeating and unfortunate. But nevertheless, organizations that do lean into your information and all of your efforts do tend to benefit well from them when you show up to respond to an incident. So I'm hoping today, by the end of this, you will have some new tools in your tool belt to help guide you in this journey. If you are just getting started in incident response, considering a career into it, feel free to reach out and let me know anytime you're interested, and we can certainly chat offline anytime. So there's two different definitions that we need to keep in the back of our heads as we go through it. So an event in this case is simply an observable occurrence that is relevant to information security. That's all it is. It's just something that happens that we find relevant. We don't really know whether or not if the intent behind it is good, bad, or ugly. So there does usually need to be some follow-up actions, some more investigation, some more effort going into it, because an event simply on its own without context really doesn't offer a ton of value in the grand scheme of things. But the other side of it is events are necessary for us as far as an incident response capacity goes. Without these events, we can't really correlate what's happened inside of our environment to anything meaningful. And all of this information does pose some value in the incident response process. These events can simply come from all different kinds of places. You might get phone calls from your service desk saying, hey, we had reports of staff phoning in with this issue. You might get some kind of event monitoring tool. If you have like infrastructure monitoring or security monitoring, you might actually get a notification that says, hey, we saw something and it was evil, so please act accordingly. Or you may actually experience some kind of outage. So whether you are using a website for the business and it goes down suddenly, or you can't reach something, or for whatever reason the data that's showing up isn't the way it's supposed to, there can be a whole series of events that go on around that. So you don't want to discount one just because it might not be relevant. It all tells a big part of the story. So an incident is simply a security event that results in damage or risk to information security. So when we talk about events, we don't really know the intent or anything behind them. That is the case here. We actually do know now for sure that we have conclusive proof there is some kind of incident in the works. We do have somebody who has run a bunch of events that is designed to elicit some harm, break something to do with the information security of the network. The secret ingredient here is crime. That's the long and short of it. Basically, somebody is pursuing this criminal act for whatever means and whatever measures they want to take with it, but you're the unwilling victim, unfortunately. So let's talk incident versus event. So we mentioned before that an event is simply just some information of relevancy, right? So we have a failed logon attempt. Do we have an incident right yet, or do we have just an event for the time being? I'll put it out to the chat there. Yeah, an event. Absolutely. Because it's just simply somebody failed to log in, right? I fat finger my password all the time. You know, every 3 months, we always run into this problem. What about a malware outbreak? Yeah. Yep. We're 100% in incident territory at this point. Malware is malicious software. That's just the portmanteau for it. So really any unwanted or unwelcome software is usually another situation. Many organizations will have potentially unwanted programs. They might not necessarily be malware, but they might create an excessive permissions situation where you can't you know, keep control of your data as well. So unnecessary software may not necessarily elicit an actual incident in and of itself, but anything that is like confirmed malware is 100%. Yeah, we're in incident territory. What about an antivirus service that's been stopped on a workstation? Are we in incident territory or event still? Yeah, event, absolutely. Because various infrastructure management will need to adjust antivirus tools. They may need to stop them in order to install certain components. They might need to pause them to introduce some bypasses that are supposed to be there. So very real common problem. What about a distributed denial of service attack? That's pretty much in the name right there. We have an actual incident on the way. Basically, somebody is taking a bunch of computers and launching them in our direction. Yeah, we absolutely have an incident. Now, what we can and can't do about it, that's open to interpretation. Sometimes your ISP can get involved. Most of the time, they just want to take a nap. So at the end of the day, you might be on your own. What about a large upload to an unknown location? This is the last one, I promise. Yeah, simply an event, right? People back up stuff all the time. Right. So whether or not we have an incident in the works, we're not really sure. So when we're talking incident response, we have a few very specific outcomes from each of the steps. And very simply, the main one is to get the business back online. So chances are when you're in an incident response scenario, you have a situation where you can't perform some layer of the business, right? Whether the websites are down, whether a database is inaccessible, whether some part of the business is unavailable for standard business activities, your business is offline. So you have to be able to get it back online. That's the big ultimate goal from incident response. But there's a few subcategories that we follow here. So our first step is identifying compromised assets. We need to scope the size of the problem. We need to understand all of the affected systems, how they might interact, and what they might be affected with before we can really move to the next one, which is containing the spread. So when we have identified and cataloged all of our assets that are compromised, we want to be able to migrate them or otherwise isolate them from the network so that the damage doesn't continue to spread. So if we're talking something like a malware outbreak, for instance, we might go ahead and disconnect them from the network. We might remove them, take away some permissions, physically move them, whatever that looks like. At that point, the eradication needs to go here. I keep meaning to change this, and I, for whatever reason, can't get around to it. We want to eradicate the threat first before we recover the asset. Don't take that as the steps in order there. Eradicating the threat is simply we find all the attacker methods of persistence and we close them off. So whatever those might be, get rid of them. We don't need them. Now, once we've eradicated the threat, now we can recover the asset. So recovering the asset is simply bringing the data back online into the systems, back into the fold. So if we're talking something like a malware outbreak, we might reinstall any operating system tools, reinstall any libraries, bring anything back onto the system itself that is relevant and useful, keeping in mind that we have to do a few steps after this recovery piece before we can close down the incident. Once we're there, we want to minimize whatever fallout we can. If it means getting involved with our insurance companies, that's sort of an overarching thing. We want to make sure that we're always in touch with them if they're responsible to something in some capacity. If we have legal, for instance, they might want a lot of information on the tail end of the incident. They may work with you in between. Depending on if you are engaging law enforcement, you might need to provide some additional evidence or some additional insight, depending on where they come in the pathway. But the most important thing is we learn something from it. What are the lessons learned from this that we can take into the business, make some business decisions, and carry on from there? So our first big step, and this is a constant one that sort of happens before the incident, is usually the best time for it. Sometimes you'll find preparation is lacking in some incident response. That's a very real problem that every organization faces. But you won't rise to the occasion. You'll fall to your lowest level of preparation. So at this point, if your teams aren't well prepared and they aren't well established in this business and within your own business to respond, then you're going to have a bad time when it comes to responding to an incident. The preparation is important. So you want to keep your contact info updated. So depending on your incident response process, your plans, your notification requirements, you may actually have to get somebody on the phone at a really uncomfortable time. You don't want to have to be calling around a bunch of numbers that may or may not be the correct one for the person. So phone trees are a good step for this. Make sure they're up to date. Check that usually once every quarter. If people have a habit of changing their phone numbers often, if they don't, you can extend that out to 6 months. But make sure that update is, or those updates go in accordingly. When we talk out of band communications, this is simply in the event that our email is compromised, as in the attacker is in our email. What happens if the attacker has an account that has access to Slack or Teams or whatever that looks like? What are we going to do with that? So you want to make sure you have a way to secure your communications during an incident until you can confirm that your traditional ones that you're using in the business are well and truly secured. So out-of-band cell phones are always good, individual personal cell phones. I worked in a spot where they had what was called the bat phones, where they were just flip phones that were sitting around in case of emergencies. So in the event the VoIP system went down, we had a plan in place to continue having discussions. Forensics media, if you are fortunate enough to have somebody internally who can run your forensics for an incident, you want to make sure that any collection media that you're using to gather the evidence is sanitized, ready to go, and available. So that goes into the next one, your tools here. If you are collecting this evidence and it is going to law enforcement, or you are collecting it for an action internally, as in we're going to, let this person go as a result of this breach that they created themselves kind of deal. Whatever that is, you want to make sure that the evidence gathering process and the evidence gathering tools, as well as all the buckets that it's going into, are clean and available. So you want to test that before the incident happens, because figuring out that you have old evidence in the middle of collection, probably not a good time. When we talk documentation, this is simply your standard operating procedures, your processes, your procedures for getting in touch with different parts of the business, notifying customers, any of that documentation that's relevant to the business and by extension the incident, you want to make sure that's somewhere, because it's never a good time to have an incident if SharePoint goes down as part of the incident and you're relying on the documentation that lives in SharePoint. So you want to make sure that all of that information is readily available in two places if you can. Some organizations will keep offline copies, although that's incredibly difficult given our remote situation. In most cases, that's likely to stay. But having it in two separate spots that you can access that are somewhat separated in a way that one being compromised won't affect the other. You'll have to keep documentation up to date in both spots, but fortunately you can just update in one and push it over to the other, and away you go. And finally, a clean shirt and make sure you're well rested. Incidents take a long time. For the most part, when you're dealing with incidents, they are long, and you're usually stuck in a boardroom, and the smell of stale pizza and stale people gets a bit old pretty quick. So yeah, definitely make sure you have a clean shirt and you've had some sleep. The collection of evidence. Yeah, Grant, we're going to get to that. So the process of identification here, we can look at many different sources. We have log data. We have other kind of event information. Again, the people who actually sent in the original request of this is broken or it isn't working, that can be a really solid source of identification. They might be the first line of identification that you have. So it does come from many sources. But once we've declared an incident, we proceed doing the following. Knowing what we know about our various layers of compromise, we want to take those little bits that we know. So for instance, if we're looking at something like a ransomware outbreak and we have a desktop that has this confirmed ransomware, we might want to know what that activity looks like on that desktop. So part of the investigation might be very carefully going into that desktop, looking through and seeing if we can find any kind of files that might be dropped. If it's dropped in a specific pathway, naming conventions, file activity, event activity, we want to look for all of those. As we identify assets that are compromised, we want to be able to catalog them in a way that we can quickly reference. One of the things that you have to do during the containment phase is go through and actually contain all of the assets that you found that were having problems. So once you've done so, then in that case, you can move on to the further steps. So make sure these are all cataloged nice and easy. Excel spreadsheets are available all over the place. Google Sheets are another example of it. Just make sure that your permissions are well locked down and everything is kept away from unauthorized use. From there, one of the things you can do if you have a series of indicators of compromise, but you want to be able to pick up if anything new shows up, various monitoring tools go into this to help you with that. So one idea that consistently gets a lot of praise in sort of an incident response circle is this: you configure your firewall to sinkhole known bad traffic and alert whenever it experiences a connection outbound to the known C2 address. So if we're talking command and control systems, in that case, when we see an asset reaching out to a malicious URL, we want to make sure that that gets put into our firewall so that A, it can't talk out any further and grab new updated information from the attacker, and B, cataloging that goes a long way to figuring out just how big the spread is. So usually once you put in these blocks, the attempts to bounce back off of it can be pretty easily caught. From there, anything else that comes up, if you find any new files, any new registry entries, any new traffic, just go ahead and include those in your various layers of monitoring and your notifications, because you want to keep a note of all the observations as you go along. Lots of books related to wine. Yeah, we're wine connoisseurs around here, that's for sure. So once we've gone ahead and we've identified all of the affected assets, we want to start the containment process. So our best way to do that is just simply removing them from the network, whatever that looks like. So if we're talking about Windows systems, depending on the resources being used, we can just simply remove them from the domain and they're no longer accessible. But that doesn't quite contain the whole spread. So if we're just removing from the domain, we might want to do some additional network layer stuff like VLAN segmentation or amending our firewall ACL list. So when I mentioned creating some configuration that would allow your systems to tell you if any new communications were happening outbound, your ACL list is where that would happen. That's a good place to put it. So keep those in mind. Keep your firewall admins on speed dial whenever there's an incident in the works. If you have a physical device, simply remove it from the network. If you can just walk over to the desk and pull the cord, that is a really exceptional way to do that. Works pretty well, as long as Wi-Fi isn't still enabled. If Wi-Fi is still enabled on the system, then yeah, you're going to have a bad time. So make sure if you are physically removing the Ethernet cable that the Wi-Fi doesn't immediately kick into the corporate Wi-Fi as well. So should we power off the affected assets? If we can avoid it, no. But I say if we can avoid it. There will be some times where a user might panic and simply power it down and carry on. That is a very real possibility. There may be some other situations where we have to power down the device because we have to ship it. That's a very common problem too. For whatever reason, if we have to power it down, then we have to. But if we can avoid it under any circumstance, we shouldn't, because that volatile data lives in RAM. So if there's any kind of suspicious connections going outbound, any kind of weird process activity, all of that is going to be well contained within the volatile memory. If we can preserve that for forensic analysis and evidence gathering, that becomes very helpful. So once we've gone ahead and identified the entire problem and contained the spread, we can now start this eradication problem. So one of the things I mentioned about the containment and eradication efforts was removing all the attacker methods of persistence. Depending on what your attacker has done, they might be a collection of a few things, but at the very least, you're going to want to look for infected files. So when you were looking through the systems, you want to make sure that you're aware of any files that get dropped by the processes and anything else included with it, because those binaries might create additional connections that you might not be aware of. And then the reinfection process happens as soon as everything comes back online. Any network backdoors, if somebody opened Netcat and started talking outbound to their C2 server, you're going to want to close that down and make sure that it can't communicate outbound to those. So be sure to keep an eye on those. if you're dealing with something like an insider or a compromised account in general, those accounts should have been disabled sometime in the containment phase. Now this is the time to change them. So sometimes this can happen in parallel in the scope of business. You might go ahead and remove an account from the environment. You might disable it, reset the password, hoping that the user gets there first before the attacker does. In most cases, you can simply phone them and say, I'm about to reset your password. Please immediately log in, set a new one, set it nice and strong. No, don't tell me what it is, and then carry on. So you may go through the process of changing these passwords while you're containing the incident. That's totally fine. Any unauthorized scheduled tasks or cron jobs. So for anybody who hasn't done a lot of sysadmin work, the scheduled tasks and the cron jobs are basically just automated tools that system administrators have available to them at large. The really nice thing about it is they can streamline a lot of basic sysadmin work. The downside to it is attackers, if they have the right layers of credentials, can do the same things you can. So if you're an administrator creating scheduled tasks, so can the attacker. So you want to have, if you can, beforehand in the preparation phase, have a list of these hanging around if you can, so that you know what good, bad, or ugly looks like. If you don't have those, sometimes you can take a look at where they're located. Attackers might not go so far as to put them in the right files. They might not be so wise as to put descriptions behind it. Any scheduled tasks or cron jobs in a Linux environment that just don't smell right, you can usually disable them and wait for the screen test, keeping in mind that you might impact the business. So it's a balancing act. So we've gone ahead and identified all the problems, and we've contained everything as best we can, or as completely as possible. Now we've gone ahead and eradicated everything. We're fairly confident that the attacker is no longer persistent in our network. Great. Let's go through the process of recovering the assets. So in this case, we're going to be restoring our affected systems, which is essentially bringing them back online, reintroducing the data, whatever it is that we have to do. So any applications that need to go back into business, those get installed, updated, whatever need be. That data gets loaded back into it. Once that data is restored successfully, the data ownership has to confirm functionality. So we talk two things. You see data ownership and data custodianship. Data ownership is the person who's ultimately in charge of the data, right? So in something like a finance environment, the payroll data might belong to the payroll department. They are the data owners. But the ones who actually grant access are the data custodians. That could be somebody in the IT department doing that work. So just because you're granting the access doesn't mean you own the data. Just because you own the data doesn't mean you're necessarily hands-on keyboard provisioning the access. Once we've gone ahead and restored everything, the business signs off, says, yeah, all the data is exactly where it's supposed to be. Functionality is great, looks good, excellent. Go ahead, bring it back online. Keep testing, keep validating, make sure that everything's working okay. Watch the traffic, watch the environment, make sure that there is no reinfection or reissue of malicious intent that's happening. Definitely spend some time analyzing the system activity before you go ahead and close it down. That's where that additional testing piece comes in, by the way, consistently keeping an eye on the environment. Remember lessons learned? So what did we learn, right? Most of the time, business decisions will come as a result of an incident. You'd be surprised how there's no budget for security. Then there's an incident, and then suddenly money is raining down from the heavens. So as unfortunate as that situation might be, that's just the long and short of it. So what did we learn? Because that is going to ultimately go into a business decision down the line. So that post-mortem process, a lot of meetings, a lot of discussions, a lot of conversations about what can we do to amend this next time. We want to put together incident reports. So most organizations will have a need for an incident report, whether it's for compliance, whether it's for another audit situation down the line. Some of them just hang on to it for the sake of keeping record as to all the incidents that have happened. Regardless of your reasons, keep those incident reports. They do provide a lot of insight into what happened, the actions that were taken, and away we go. I like to state this, I try to never advocate for dismissal. So all of my consulting days, I would be brought in, I would have a lot of assessments and a lot of risk associated with it. You know, regardless of what happened, I would never tell somebody that, yeah, hey, okay, this sysadmin has to go. Unless we obviously had reason to suspect they were an insider threat, which I'd never come across. For the most part, you know, stuff's going to happen, right? Like accidents happen, security mistakes happen. I was 2 weeks into an internship and I accidentally let a virus off the chain. These things happen. So I never really advocate for dismissal unless it's kind of one of those like, okay, well, you really should have known better than to save your credentials in the dark web kind of deal. But even then, I really try to never advocate for dismissal. In the report itself, I do like to present the facts of what happened. So at this time, in this capacity, this happened. The who, what, when, and where, and I guess by how much, if we're looking to force a 5W here. Basically, we're just there to present the facts and tell the story to anyone who wasn't there. So most of the time, managers might be aware there was an incident, but they might not be directly involved. Totally common. When we report this to our incident response, when we conduct our incident reports, we want to make sure that we have recommendations in them because, again, we're making business decisions as a result of this. What are the recommendations to fix this problem next time? That has to include an ask from senior leadership. Are we short on resources to manage some of our systems? Let's find some money and hire some people. Do we need some security tooling to help us do this better at scale? Let's free up some capital and get this going. Most of the time, it's about finding some money for resources that you didn't have. So the ask usually needs to be clear, has to be backed up by a strong business case, and if possible, align the ask to, hey, it would cost us $500,000 to this, but it cost us $1 million to clean up this incident. Suddenly the control doesn't seem so out of reach anymore when we're forking out $1 million in fines, fees, and overall costs. Yeah, never blame the people for a process failure. That's actually a really good point, Adam. I really like that. Process failures happen all the time. Processes are written by people, though. So if we aren't testing processes, if we aren't validating the processes in place, then we're in tough shape otherwise. So yeah, that's where we're at. So I want to give everybody just a few minutes if you got to run, answer some emails, go to the bathroom, grab some coffee, whatever that looks like. Let's take 10. We can carry on. We'll do it without the camera. Everybody knows what I look like. There isn't a whole lot there. I promise you aren't missing anything. Okay, so all right, so let's talk about our company here that's in the pursuit of about to experience a breach. So we represent Flancrest Enterprises. Yes, that certainly is not mine, but I just found that whole idea hysterical and decided to roll with it. So yeah, thanks, Adam. Right, I used to play in bands. I know how this goes. So we are the ever intrepid folks at Flancrest Enterprises. We are an e-commerce based business here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. But obviously, some of us will work remote. That's totally acceptable and in bounds. We're really cool about that. We do sell an awful lot of products, something to the tune of $13 million annually from our e-commerce environment, that's a lot of money. That adds up. So we are an enterprise, albeit we might have a small team, but we're still going to work well and it'll be good. So we have an hourly revenue of $1,500 per hour. That's where we're at. So every hour that the business is online and awake, 24 hours a day, because it's e-commerce, we're good for $1,500 coming in the bank account. We finished our first PCI audit, as in we successfully said, yeah, we're good, go right ahead and attest that we're in bounds in January of 2021. So fairly recent, but there's definitely some considerations here. So there are some ground rules. This is a simulation, but this is real, right? These kind of situations do happen on a regular basis. We wind up in this situation where people who have compliant footprints still do actually run into a situation where they might be out of compliance or they experience a breach. So definitely don't buck the simulation. We're here to have a good time and learn and grow and develop and moreover, just really enjoy it. So feel free to work together. Obviously, I'll be putting you into some kind of a group dynamic here, so stand by for that. But yeah, most importantly, have fun, collaborate, ask any questions. Are there any questions about what we're about to do? We're about to go play. I'm going to show you the game here in just a second, but if there are any questions before we get to it, I will happily answer those right now. Excellent. I'm going to take silence as golden. All right, Flancrest team, let's have an incident. And for that, There we go. That's the one. Outrageous. Everybody can see this. We are on Teams, TJ. Oh, good to see you. Yeah, absolutely. So this is a team-based approach, right? Every time we talk incident response, it's always team-based. Even in small organizations, you're still going to be working with a litany of other people involved in this. So you are going to want to get used to working in teams. The only two roles in this case that do not have a team focus are the CEO and the CISO. So they have some specific elements associated with the incident that we have to work through. They are by and large responsible for some of the more strategic parts of it. So our CEO is by and large responsible for managing some of the customers, dealing with some of the service provider information, whatever might be coming around of it. There may be some element of insurance and compliance associated with it. So we do have some of that, as well as CEOs having spent some time in a business of some capacity, because nobody's ever born being in charge, I guess, depending on what part of the world you're in. But for the most part, we come into a CEO role having spent some time in a business. Part of how we spend that time is in the pursuit of building our network and growing our various staffing levels. So we actually possess the ability as CEOs to bring in some ad hoc bench strength. We can actually just simply make a phone call to somebody who doesn't work in the space. A gifted security professional will just simply arrive and present some information of use that may result in some of these power-ups. I'll talk about those in a sec. So our CISO is a little bit more hands-on in this sense, but again, still very strategic. So we are in a situation where our CISOs can do something called clearing a roadblock. So when we have an incident situation, if there's a gap in some information, or if there's some kind of situation that leads to a problem, non-technical in nature, as in a computer hasn't divided by 0 and fallen down on itself. Anything short of that, if it's a people or a process situation, something that another person can simply walk up and fix very quickly, that's what the battering ram does. Another one that is very useful is this birds of a feather. So CISOs do have a very vast security network. So this might call down a more a different security professional who is from the same kind of section as the CEO ability there, but it takes less time. There's more of them. CISOs usually spend more time courting more security professionals, so they tend to have a wider network. They can usually bring people in a little bit faster. So same concept. If you feel the incident is stalled, or if I feel the incident is stalled, I will go ahead and advise you to click that accordingly. And when I say click, I mean I do the clicking because it's all running internally here. So our department managers, they possess, again, a little bit of strategy, but a little bit of operational capacity that they need. So they're often involved in some of the resource shifting to make it so that the incident can progress. So a good one here to keep in mind is this out-of-band communication strategy. So remember how I talked about the out-of-band communication? Some of these things align. The out-of-band communication strategy is effectively an ability that allows the rest of the team to carry on working the incident in exchange for taking themselves out of the game. So one of the problems we have is if we don't communicate frequently in an incident, we might get pulled into a call where we have to share what's going on. We will, by and large, in most incident scenarios, have to have phone calls. We will have to work with different people. We will have to engage them for, warm handovers, hot handovers, but we will still need to have some phone calls. We want to limit the amount of phone calls because that definitely gets into the way and loses focus. So out-of-band communication strategy, you reserve the right to cancel an all-hands meeting if there hasn't been enough communication in exchange for taking yourself out of the game as a department manager. Similarly, humans need to rest, right? We're not robots. We have the capacity to program robots, which is such a cool discipline. I'm having so much fun doing that. But the unfortunate nature of humans is the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. You, as the department manager, have the ability to go, hey, listen, I just need a little bit more, and then you can call it a day. So when we get to turn number 12, that represents 12 in-game hours. That's 12 hours that your incident has been rolling. We don't have 24/7 coverage in Flancrest. Part of our next step was to get that, but for the short term, we're just working with the team we have. So when we get to 12 hours, we have to take a rest. Everybody has to go to bed. We have to just move the incident along, but the business is still down. This ability grants the opportunity for new resources to just work it for a little longer and hopefully get to somewhere closer before we have to take a quote unquote break. Now, for what it's worth, there won't be any more breaks until the end of the session, in which case you can take as long of a break as you need. So when I mentioned that we have a PCI compliance element to this, I absolutely meant it. So our unsung heroes that are kind of strange and wonderful, I'm allowed to call them that. I used to work in compliance. It's okay. We are very much about the paperwork in compliance, unfortunately, but it has a very specific requirement. The other side of it is you have to maintain some kind of communication with your compliance governing bodies in the event of an incident. So for anybody in the PCI space, if you have a large-scale data breach, one of the first phone calls might be to one of the major card brands, and that usually has to come from somebody in your compliance program. So you want to keep some good governance, good compliance people involved. Most of the time, the compliance people do have a role to play inside of an incident, and that is absolutely the case here. So when we're talking the compliance team, we have a paper dragons ability. That is basically your interaction with your outside compliance environment. So you do want to make sure that you are, as a compliance professional, we're considering running that. But it takes time. We can't spam them. So we have 15 turns before we can play this again. So this is one of these abilities where the more you play it, the more likely you are to achieve some kind of bell curve. But unfortunately, because of how long you can, how long this rolls, you kind of want to hope for a better roll up front rather than hoping that you can even it out with the numbers. But I'll leave it up to the compliance team to decide. A lot of compliance professionals are also formerly technical. They may have come up through operations. They may have started in some other capacity or another. A lot of them have seen a command line, and whether or not they actually enjoy it doesn't matter. They do have some technical acumen. It is incredibly valuable. And in some cases, in this case, it's a bit like riding a bike. You never forget, but the longer it's been, the higher the chances you'll break something. So having that previous technical acumen inside of a compliance role is excellent. It does grant you, the compliance person, the ability to play some containment roles. I'll go through how that works in just a minute. So my operations leads, they're a little bit further down into the weeds here. So they are spending a little bit more time hands on keyboard. They might have some level of business acumen within the business itself and how it works. They might have some client-facing interactions depending on the size and the scope of the business. In this case, Flancrest does have some pretty large-scale enterprise clients that do leverage the e-commerce platform. So you actually do have a bit of business to business as much as you have, business to customer interactions here. So the operations leads, they typically have a little bit more insight into the environment itself. They understand the business a little bit better. So you'll find their abilities kind of transcend a little bit of both. Investigative actions here, this purpose-built knowledge, this is basically, they've been coupled with the infrastructure for so long, they know all the corners of it. If somebody gets lost along the way, quote unquote, they actually reserve the ability to just go in and amend some of this if they need to. So that one can be really helpful if you're trying to investigate in a large capacity. Similarly, they have a customer interaction. A lot of operations leads might actually work within a customer environment depending on how the situation is. So for anybody from a managed services environment, you might actually be that person who is working very tightly with the business itself as part of their IT strategy. So you do actually provide some kind of customer interaction, some kind of interference to some extent. And last, but certainly not least, our very intrepid technical analyst team. These ones, this is a very wide scope. This is just a way of putting a fine point on a wide scope. This is basically anybody who, your database admins, your server admins, your firewall admins, network admins, any of the admins in a business would fall under the technical analyst category here. So they have a lot of really excellent technology interactions that they might need. A lot of the hands-on keyboard work in an incident does come from the technology-based teams. So you will find a lot of the activity maybe comes in this direction. So for those of you on the technical analyst team, be ready to think through a couple of steps ahead. This particular ability is one that I will actually call out. And I saw one name that popped out on here in particular. If he's still on the call, that one would work. There's the guy right there. Mr. David Coombe. He and I go back quite a ways. He, in this case, will be the venerable gray genius. So for what it's worth, I built this ability in recognition of my dad, Doug Leece, who is doing a lot of the CTF work and Hacking 101 work. Yeah, when it comes to technological abilities, I have yet to find somebody who is even as capable as he is. The guy is just seeing around corners all over the place. So if you have a chance, go pop by the CTF room, tell him you say hello. Thanks for the contribution, because he did an amazing job with that CTF, and he does every year. But every technology-based team member always has that one person, gray-haired, and their skills are, again, arcane and mystical. In this case, Dave is also a gray-haired, somewhat bespectacled gentleman from time to time with a very large background in forensics. So with that having been said, your teams, and by extension, the whole of the game, you now have in-house forensics. Exceedingly rare. Most organizations don't have the money it takes to bring that on, but because Dave's here and he has an amazing background in that space, your whole team now has the ability to run forensics without having to outsource it to a non-player entity. So that's awesome. You don't need this forensic analysis work now. It's already built in-house. The hair color. Oh, okay. Well, Dave's on the call, so I'm going to keep everybody with the forensics anyway. I can fill in the gaps. So the way the game works is we have it's a turn-based system, right? So each of these activities, whether we're communicating with these various entities, whether we're querying these security controls, these power-ups show up on their own, so it's not a big deal. But these power-ups, when they come, I'll simply invoke them. But any of these abilities constitutes one turn. So if we were to go ahead and get our customer, if we're having a lot of good conversation, but it's taking a little bit to come to a consensus, yeah, I'm going to go ahead right? Asset, whatever we're doing, that counts as one on the map here. So we can see that going through and investigating everything at a single step takes a considerable amount of work. Is this better? Can you still hear me? Come on. I have all the power now. What's going on? Is that any better? Yeah? Okay. All right. I just got ahead of it. Okay. I'm too fast. I got to slow down. I think I got to go to bed too. So we can investigate each of these individually, but as you can see, we have an enormous amount of infrastructure, and it's going to take a great deal of time to go through everything. So maybe let's not investigate piecemeal, because it can take a little while. Okay, so we'll set this up again. We'll leave that back to blank. There we go. Now, every single team possesses the ability to communicate, okay? So the communication button here, this is just simply a status update of whatever value to whomever. So in the case of most incidents, when we talk about communication, usually it flows up because the various layers want to be aware of what's going on from the technical analyst team, but any team can communicate at any time with no penalty. It doesn't cost you a turn, so you can just simply push this communicate button once within your turn, whether it goes well or whether it goes poorly. That's a random decision. The only time that you're going to lose anything or suffer any penalties is if we roll a 1, in which case then yes, there might be some kind of penalty on the other side of it. But it is a small chance because we have 20 options here, anything greater than 1, and everybody gets to continue playing regardless of the outcomes. However, if we go too long without an incident communication from any team, it doesn't matter which team, any team in general, if we go too long, we get pulled into an all hands meeting where nobody gets to play for at least an hour, maybe 2, depending on how long it's been. So one of the things that's a good habit to get into through an incident work is just making sure that you're communicating often, whether that's inbound communications like Teams or email, if those aren't compromised, or whether it's something like over the phone, like a conference bridge, hopefully with better mic fidelity. Last but not least is our security controls. Okay, so you can access these security controls as the technology team. By and large, they're the ones who have the most interaction with it, so we can go ahead and communicate with those anytime. Those can either return some very interesting information that'll help guide the incident in some direction, or they might not work and we have to try again. So it is a bit of a guessing game as to whether or not we're going to get to where we need to go. But the nature of it is we have these security controls. They can provide insight. They do have value, although these are mostly detective controls at this point. So all we're really doing is just looking in at log data. So when the turn comes up, I'll simply decide, I will tell the teams what we can and can't do. I will guide you through everything. I am Google for all intents and purposes as well. So if you're not sure about whether something is feasible or whether you can do something, just simply pop it in the chat and ask. It is a team-based decision-making process. So while I was going through this, definitely I hope you saw some teams that stood out to you as something that you would want to have. Whatever that is right now, please go ahead and just pop in the chat where you want to put yourself in these teams, keeping in mind that the CEO and the CISO are singular roles, unless I have an enormous amount of people showing up, in which case this can just be kind of a global kind of situation. So yes, in the chat right now, just go ahead and pop in the teams that you want. And if I have to rebalance them, I will. But anything that's missing, I'll just go ahead and play that side of it. So yeah, pop that in right now. Unless you're sending me direct messages. I can't see those as easily. Simon, if you just want to observe, go ahead and observe. Okay, no worries. Vincent, I have Vincent as an operations lead. Okay. Sarah, I have Sarah as a technical analyst. Excellent. How do we participate? TJ, you pick a team that you want to be on, and we go from there. Thank you, Bruce. Our unsung compliance heroes. Anything technical? Let's put you on that role as well. Okay. Is anybody else playing? So we can run with a small group for sure, but the more people that want to play, whether you've had any experience or not is irrelevant. This is built for everybody. I've run this successfully with departments that have never seen incident response, and they come away having learned a whole ton. All right, Simon, I like that. Jason, can I put you in the department manager space? Yeah, all right. Okay. Simon, would you like to be my CEO? The more the merrier. That's right. We're here to have fun. It doesn't matter. I promise. I promise. There's nothing. Stick me in the executive role. Yeah, okay, sure, Adam. Adam, you can be my CISO. Simon, I'll put you in as the CEO. Now, don't worry. Again, yeah, fun at all costs, right? That's the spirit, TJ. Yeah, at the end of the day, the only way that we're ever going to learn and grow in this space is if we get our hands dirty with it. This isn't a real business. There is no real impact. No matter what happens here, we're just here to have a good time. Chances are, whatever you encounter, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, all of the events that you're seeing here have all happened in real life with dyed-in-the-wool incident response professionals. I promise you. We're just here to have a good time. Let's learn. Let's enjoy. Okay, so we have enough to run with. And, oh, Ben, sure. Ben, let's put you in... Yeah, let's do, there's a position with, okay. All right, so, okay, we'll do that. Okay. Love it, buddy. TJ's with you, Sarah. You're not alone in this. Ben, let's put you in the operations leads. I need another body in there. Okay. Excellent. We all ready? I'm going to assume we're all ready. Because the time it's going to take for me to get the readies in the chat, everything's good to go. All right, so we are the intrepid team at Flancrest Enterprises. It's first thing in the morning. We've come in, we've seen a notification that says for some reason or another, our systems are not functioning. We're not sure what. We just received a notification from our help desk that their customers have been calling in and complaining that they can't access the environment. in whatever capacity. It seems to be very intermittent, very strange. We're not really sure what's going on. So I'm going to go to my technical team first. My technical team, because this is a wide discipline of knowledge, the one team to rule them all, you basically get 2-for-1 turns, okay? So you can use that as an opportunity to investigate a couple assets. Now, I gave you these 2 for free. They're not impacted, I promise you, so you don't have to waste time investigating your firewalls. But in this case, you get 2 actions for the price of 1. So in one single turn, you can do a couple of queries. You can use an ability or 2, or you can simply manually investigate something. So one of the best things to do when we're not sure, we have a problem, but we're not quite sure, it's an all hands kind of situation. Our customers are not able to ring through any transactions. We're running out of problems here to solve. We're running out of hands to solve. The security team gets involved. So one of the first steps that I would always recommend in this case, wherever we can, is if we have these controls available to us, these detective controls, maybe they can give us some insight. So we know that ever since 8 a.m. this morning, the systems haven't been functional. Just for the sake of keeping everybody on the same page, we'll say that it was sometime around when we received the notifications that were in there. So the timestamp versus the data that we have to look back in an incident scenario, pretty limited. So the incident manager, who is me, is going to recommend that we either query some of our detective controls, or we can go ahead and try some of these other abilities. But in this case, because we don't really know whether or not we are dealing with anything concrete yet, it might be good to go ahead and run one of these as our first turn. So I'll leave it up to TJ and Sarah to just think through it and chat through it if they want. That you can certainly put that chat right in the window here if you'd like, or you can direct message each other. But yeah, I'll just give you a minute to come up with what you want to do. Yeah, query the logs. Good, cool. I like it. Let's have a look at the firewall. Some suspect traffic shows up, but it's not entirely clear since it has some similarity to a business process seen before. Investigation is effective, and you get 1 additional investigative action if a senior director of the business is present in the game. In this case, because we have a department manager, you actually get an additional freebie. So what I mean by these additional free actions is in the scope of our 1 major turn, your team now has 1 action it can run again. So whether you want to do the knowledge ingestion, like Sarah mentioned here, whether you want to go investigate this desktop individually and do a different security control, whatever that is, but you get 1 free investigate, 1 free push of this investigate button without any penalty in the turn piece. So you have 1 more turn plus a free investigation ability. You can hang on to it until later. It does transcend through the rounds if you do want to use it for now. So it's up to you. If you want another query of the security controls, that's not a bad idea because we have 1 device that looks kind of but we're not really sure because it is similar to some business processes we've encountered in the past. So it might be good to do another round of this just to see. But again, I'll leave it up to you. Do we want another round of the logs or the SIM data or anything in the IDS? Yeah, another round of firewall logs. Sounds good. Or SIM data. So the benefit of querying the SIM data is it can give you sometimes other correlating events outside of the firewall data. So the firewall is just going to be connections in and out. The SIM data itself definitely can give you maybe some more endpoint like efforts or anything else that might have been seen across controls. So SIM data is going to be a good one. I'm going to take the logs again, and I'm going to use this as the SIM data because that is going to be excellent. So we have 2 devices. We have a workstation 6. And we have a backup system. that are showing some suspicious activity. Repeated RDP failures were observed, and a corresponding alert was found detailing these events as a part of a possible brute force. So we have one free investigative action that you can run this turn. You can either hang on to it until later, or you can use it now. I would recommend either recommend investigating the backup server or investigating that workstation 6 just to round out your turn. Or you can simply hang on to it if you want to stack those up. Those do carry on. Yeah, let's look at that workstation. Now, I haven't had a chance to update this interface. I just came out of beta with all this. Investigation complete. No indicators of compromise found. Oh, well, okay. So our technical team is actually looking for is good. We're looking good, but we're still suspecting a breach in some capacity or another. But we want some more investigation. So my operations leads, they have sprung into action. Everybody's interested. I highly recommend this purpose-built knowledge because that'll give you some freebie ones. There is a server outstanding. Yes, we still have to investigate backup 01. But my operations leads here, they do have the ability to grant some increased investigative actions if we run this. So I would very highly recommend this if the ops team is interested. Let's do it. Grip it and grip it, as the kids say. So we have another freebie investigation action. So we can either delegate that down to the technology team to go and investigate the backup server, but because you're the operations leads, you can also leverage that this turn to go and investigate that server if you so choose. So I'll leave it up to you to decide here. And if in the absence of that, we can just simply move to the next turn. And if we want, again, we can hang on to those investigative actions. Not a big deal. We can certainly look at that backup server if we wish. Oh, and sorry, that's on the ops team, if the ops team wants to do that or not. All right, let's take a look at that server anyway. Oh, device shows some indicators of compromise. We found some encrypted files. Investigation is successful. However, compliance team loses one turn while they dig up the list of backups that are supposed to be encrypted. Yeah, in this case, what we're seeing here is we have some encrypted files, but backup server, we're not quite sure if the backup itself, because we have a compliance requirement and we do store some of this information, we do need to maintain some kind of security over the data at rest. So the compliance team does need to go through and figure out whether or not that data is supposed to be encrypted. Now, I'm not going to actually ask you to go and investigate that because I don't have any data for you to investigate. Compliance team, it's going to be another turn before we come around to you because you're busy investigating whether or not this data is supposed to be encrypted. Perhaps I missed it, but for curiosity, what's the annual revenue of this company? Just trying to weigh the downtime costs. Oh, the annual revenue, we're at 13 million and change, $1,500 an hour. And you can actually see the current business downtime because the business down, we're not currently processing orders. So we're losing up to $3,000 an hour right now. So it's going to be expensive. Hopefully not too expensive. Okay, so we have confirmed that we have something that's kind of fishy. We're not really quite sure. Let's leverage our technical analysts again. We want to dig in. We want to find some more of this information. It might be a good time now to leverage this accelerated knowledge ingestion. This is representative of people, having to read documentation pretty quickly and figure out if we're actually in a position where we can do anything of major consequence. So in this case, the incident manager heavily recommends this accelerated knowledge ingestion as one of your turns, or we can simply run some more control queries as well. So remember, you get 2 turns because the technical teams get those by default. So I'll leave it to you to decide. Yeah, let's build up some investigative actions because we have to look at that. So we have additional 2 freebies. So you still have 1 turn, one round that you can use within this before we go hunting. Did we want to do another round of our security controls? Because now that we have some awareness as to some of the things we're looking for, but we want to get further scoping. So do we want to consider one of these now again? Maybe the IDS, the SIM, or the firewall log, one of those 3, whichever. Keeping in mind that you might get some similar events that you've already seen. So you may want to go ahead and consider the IDS data if you're interested. Otherwise, the SIM data might be a good one. Yeah, it can be. Yeah. Excellent. So we have a whole litany of other devices. Ooh, now we're looking at something interesting. So we have 2 database servers here that we are seeing as potentially problematic. So let me just jot that down here. Sql 1 and 2. And then we have some terminal servers that are also having some problems and potentially having issues. We have our web servers. Jenkies. Come on. That's too funny. That's too much. That's too funny. Okay, so prod server 1, 2, and we have workstation 1, 2, and 5. So we have a lot here. We have 2 free investigative actions. We know the backup server is compromised because we have something suspicious. We're not quite sure. So we don't really need to investigate this one any further. But these 2 web servers are kind of interesting. And we have some terminal servers that, where were our terminal servers? Yeah, so our terminal servers, if you haven't seen these are basically systems that allow multiple connections to come in, or sorry, multiple users to use the same applications hosted on a server, effectively sharing resources. They do have immense value inside of a business, but they can also represent a bit of a concern depending on the applications and the level of use. So I think because we have 2 database servers that are responsible for our back-end commerce, those would be worth 2 investigative actions for free if we so chose. I'll leave it up to the technical team to decide that. Or our 2 web-facing servers, the external-facing ones, either or. So I guess in this case, do we want to do SQL boxes like database servers, or do we want to do web servers? I love it, Jason. So technical teams, do we want to look at our web boxes? Do we want to look at our database servers? They are pretty important. Yeah, all of this is important for what it's worth. This is all pretty critical infrastructure to the business. Why don't we look at our web servers? Let's see what those are doing. So we have some indicators of compromise, which is good. A registry query script designed to find indicators of compromise that we know of in the larger scale was successfully run across the environment and returned assets worth investigating. We have 4 additional ones. So we're down 1, but you actually get 4. So you now have a grand total of 5 that you can use. So now that we know more of what we're looking for, now that we've started to peel away the various layers of this onion, okay, we've got an extra 4 freebies. So now I count 9, 8, because we just used that one. So another box so now we don't have to determine whether or not we want to investigate our SQL boxes. We go look. Ooh. But the host has a lot of services running. We can tell some might be suspicious, though. Investigation is effective, but it costs you 1 turn to run down the list. So you actually now lose one of your investigative abilities because somebody's having to run down this list. You still have some more, but let's go ahead and take a look at your SQL servers. Attempts to query the local log data fail expertly when the administrator accidentally deletes the flat file. We're not pitting this on either of you two. This is an intern. Recovery efforts take your technical team out of the game until the next round. That's a technical roadblock. Unfortunately, we're for the next round. Now, the compliance team has come back. They've realized that the files that are encrypted are probably okay, but we're still needing some more investigation. But we know our web servers have been compromised. Our SQL servers have been compromised. Those database servers store customer information and credit card data because we are an e-commerce PCI shop. We haven't integrated any remote payment gateways into the mix. We are storing everything internally on these servers, and now these servers are confirmed to be possibly compromised. Compliance team, we may want to go ahead and inform our compliance people. Simon, I knew you were the right guy for this. I knew you were. You're gonna have a buff for that joke. I'm gonna give you a +1 for that. That was good. I knew it. So like, this guy, he's going to be the CEO. This is the good one. I like it. Okay, so my compliance team, I would highly recommend at this point, we may want to go ahead and possibly start involving compliance, but that may be a little bit premature. We're not quite sure if we actually run into a situation where we, create a bit of a false alarm that might cause them to force and look inwards. If you wanted, we can simply delegate the remaining investigative actions because you have a technical ability. You can go and conduct some investigative effort on someone's behalf if you want to carry on running down the scope of the system. So keeping in mind, we're still in the identification phase. We are at a point where we do have some visibility into what is affected, but we do still have a couple of other workstations that we know that might be a problem. So compliance team, I'll leave it up to you to think through it. In this case, it's just Bruce. So Bruce, whatever you decide. Yeah, let's do some more. So the reason why the delegation piece is quite interesting is a lot of this work happens in parallel, right? So the technical teams are constantly running these things down. The compliance teams might come in and say, hey, can you look at this? Can you look at that? These types of things will happen in parallel. So I do like to introduce the delegation actions as an opportunity. So we know that workstation 1 was a problem. So let's look at that one. Some suspect files identified and confirmed malicious, although attackers only use one method of persistence, right? Is that right? Do they only use one? Who knows? It's hard to say. The investigation is effective, and the technology teams lose no turns if a team member can detail another method of persistence. Cool. In this case, we're going to put a pin in that one because I know everybody on that call would be able to identify at least another. We're going to wait for that. So we know this workstation is broken. In this case, Bruce, if you want to, because we have a surprising amount of this affected, and we are, again, hard down, and Simon's golfing buddy said, hey, why is your website down? This now has the various visibility from the top layers of management, and they are insistently impatient. So I'm going to grant you the ability to run some more technical investigations if you wish. So I know that Workstation 2 was a problem. So we can certainly take a look at Workstation 2, and Workstation 5 was also of concern. So if it's up to you, if it is up to you, it is up to you. Do you want to investigate these two as part of the tail end of your turn here, or did we want to simply move on to the next go? I'll leave that up to you to decide. Investigate. Good call. All right, let's run. So some suspicious-looking files were submitted for analysis, and one was confirmed malicious, and an additional 2 were given. So we've lost 1, but you have another 2. And let's go look at that other workstation. Where is that one here? Workstation 5. There we go. So some more suspect files are identified. We have officially figured that out. So thank you very much, Bruce, for your intrepid efforts. We have investigated all of the potentially suspect devices at pretty large scale compromise. So we have both web servers, our backup servers, both database servers, one developer desktop, one administrator desktop, one IT desktop. But our manager managed to make it out unscathed. Good for them. So that's a good time. All right. So where we're at, we may have effectively scoped out the whole incident. We still have a lot of assets that are remain to be seen. So I'll give you three. We still have some other assets, right? So our domain controllers here are definitely of worthwhile concern. We want to consider maybe some investigations in there individually, keeping in mind that we do have some free investigative actions that we can still run. So we can go ahead and use that. But it has been quite a while since we've had any kind of communication. And because Simon's buddy got back to him and said, hey, why is your website down? Simon wants an update, and we haven't sent any for a while. So all the teams are now in an all-hands meeting. All right, because we have it. That's it. I pulled up in my Porsche. Golf clubs are still in the front because I think that's where they have the trunk in a Porsche. Although it's what I don't know about cars could fill a warehouse. So there's a couple of ways that we could do this. Our department managers, Jason, can go ahead and say, no. Everybody get back to work. I'm going to brief the CEO once the golf shoes come off and the hat goes in the back seat. If that's what we want to do, I'm going to go ahead and leave it up to Jason to determine that. Similarly, I have Adam as my CISO. This is actually a personnel roadblock. So Adam, you can actually go ahead and simply bulldoze this roadblock if you wish and say, no, I will update the business. Everybody else get back to doing what it is that they're doing. In any case, I'll leave the decision up to the CISO and the department manager if you want to go ahead. Now, if you want to pull everybody into the all-hands meeting and just let that languish, that's totally fine, but the incident's going to tick up for another 2 hours with no resolution. If you're a sales guy, you come in pointing. Yeah, Ken, yeah, fair enough, right? Every time there's a breach, all these sales teams come out of the woodwork and sell you a bunch of shelfware. Jason's going to brief the CEO. Excellent. Plays the roadblock clearing out of band communication strategy. So thank you, Jason, for going ahead and briefing the CEO. Now, as a result, all of the teams get to continue playing. So I'm going to go back to my technical analysts, and I'm going to allow them either to run some kind of a containment effort if you want, but we still haven't quite figured out the scope of the problem. We have some other devices that if we contain too early, we might actually introduce a potential backdoor that we weren't expecting, and now we can't really defend well against, especially if the attacker is still latent in the network. So we have our 2 domain controllers. We have our 2 file servers. We have a couple of app servers of generic use. Our terminal servers actually were reported potentially affected. So let's think about some investigative actions here, because you still have 6 freebies that you can use across the board. So we can go ahead and use those if you wish. If you want to accelerate some of this, you can leverage some of your security controls. Full disclosure, they may have already given you the full picture that you need. So in this case, it might be good just to simply grind out these these investigations if you wish. That having been said, the golf clubs, the hat, and the briefing took another hour, so the time is ticked up. We're officially at $7,500 lost for the day so far. So TJ and Sarah, I'll let you determine if you want to use these investigative actions or maybe go for a coffee break. In game, obviously, please stay at your terminals. I'm relying on everybody here to be awesome because everybody's having a really awesome time with this. At least I am. I'm having a lot of fun. Can we invoke help? Yes, if you really want to. You can actually go ahead to your CISO and say, we might go ahead and call in a bird of a feather here, or we might talk to the CEO who says, yeah, okay, listen, my golfing buddy is former NSA. He has a lot of this information as well. Yeah, the Gray Genius, that's a passive ability that you have. So because of this, you do have in-house forensics. If you want to start to conduct some forensic investigation on any of these devices, you have that ability in-house. It'll take you a couple of rounds, but determining on the, relative to what the report will find, you may actually be able to get an incident power-up, which will bypass effectively a stage of the incident. So if your forensic investigation finds the command and control traffic that it is using to communicate, you block that on the firewall, and all of the time it doesn't, nothing can connect outbound. then yeah, you're in a situation where you've effectively contained the whole incident. So if you want to take the time to investigate, do the forensic investigation, it will take away 1 turn per round for X amount of rounds, depending on what I determine as the incident manager. Again, I reserve the right to speed up or slow down the pace of the game. So if you wanted to go ahead with a forensic investigation on some of these compromised assets, I would suggest some of the ones that would leave good artifacts. So these web servers would be good. They can be pretty heavy in data space, so it may be a lot to kind of comb through and look at. But given that they are public, that might give you some of the insight into some of the attacks and some of the methods of persistence. The SQL servers are another good one, because your compliance team is sitting there on pins and needles going, did this data actually get compromised? They might have a duty to report this pretty soon. So it might not be a bad idea to conduct a forensic investigation in one of these directions if you so choose. Now, that having been said, if you really wanted, I would certainly allow you, because again, I control the speed of the game as I see fit. If you so chose, you could leverage networking efficacy to bring in Simon's very capable former NSA friend. We can also look to Adam's CISO friend here, Birds of a Feather. Now, may not be former NSA, but will still come in with a lot of really valuable expertise and capability, in which case those are 2 options that you can provide. So I'll leave it up to you two to decide, do you want to conduct a forensic investigation on an asset to try and gain some kind of power up in the game? Or do you want to bring in some extra bench strength who might be able to expedite this incident in some capacity? Or do you want to grind out these investigative actions on the remaining assets that are gray here? So I'll leave it up to you to think. Yeah, shorten the incident time. We're burning money, right? Lots of it. Oh, Scotch Ken. Yeah, I don't know if you caught my Scotch collection here just a few minutes ago before we got started, but it's quite a lot here. It's good. Can we do simultaneous actions? You know what, TJ? Just because you asked, I'm going to allow it to happen. In this case, though, you have to do some investigative actions as one of the pathways, and you have to bring in some bench strength. You can't do the forensic investigation as part of it. So if you want to do the forensics in-house and save that ability for somewhere else down the line, you might get 2 incident power-ups if you choose to wheel and deal there, whichever you choose. So you can run down all of these investigations. I'm going to give you that as one of your actions in parallel as part of it. But if you want to run an investigation, you will have to do it next round. Investigations and forensics. No, I'm not going to give you that. That's not fair. Let's look at your domain controllers. So the domain controllers, for anybody who isn't familiar with infrastructure, the domain controllers are effectively the crown jewels in a Windows environment. You can provision new accounts here. You can add computers to the environment, whether or not they are supposed to be there. It really doesn't do a lot of determination in that space unless you have configured some of the logic. So if you are what's called a domain admin, that is effectively the whole keys to the kingdom. You possess all the necessary power to do horrible things or good things for whatever reason. So your domain controllers are clean. Whatever happened didn't make it to your domain controllers. Excellent. We're not going to, we don't really care why right now. We're just all breathing a very collective sigh of relief that our domain controllers were not hit as a result. Okay, so that takes away 2 of those. Okay, let's look at your file servers just here. No indicators, we're good. And let's look at the one. All right. So we're coming pretty close to a good idea of what's been impacted. Now, our compliance team is still very, they're having concerns about whether or not this data has been compromised. They're kind of like, maybe we should, well, what can we do to get somebody in here? Let's go ahead and let's bring in our former NSA friend who can help us with this process. There we go. So Simon's golfing buddy comes in driving an equally nice car, although it does look like something you might find hanging around various parts of Washington, D.C. with buildings that have no signage and no foliage on the front. Simon's golfing buddy comes into the environment and says, hey, I know what it is that you're up against. You have an attacker that's targeted your e-commerce databases on purpose. They have gone so far as to take you offline, Whether it's for industrial espionage, we can't really confirm or deny, but it is primarily looking like organized crime. And one of the ways that organized crime likes to target financial systems like this is by the theft of the data itself. So we have now confirmed conclusively, without needing to conduct an investigation in this network, you're welcome, TJ, that the database information itself has been compromised in some capacity. We now know that the databases that store the credit card data and, by extension, some of the customer information have been compromised. Yeah, I think now is a good time. So my technical team that to the compliance team, and it worked out really well. Oops, hope it was encrypted. Me too, Ben, because PCI says it shall be. Right? I think you need an extra shot. There's lots here. You guys are welcome to come help yourself. So the overly technical language is kept to a minimum, and your readers, aka the compliance team, thank you for it very much. This is important. So when we talk about incident communication, you need to assume that most of your audience considers an iPad to be a rare and mystical thing, okay? And that's not meant to be a dig in any direction. That's not how this works. This is meant to be an understanding that not everybody's going to know what a domain controller is. Not everybody's going to know what SQL is or why it's relevant. Not everyone's going to know how the web server plays into the environment and how a website can lead to data theft, right? Not everybody's going to be aware of that. So you want to present this in a way that anybody can understand. This is an ever-evolving challenge. I promise you, organizations with security budgets that everybody would happily step over anyone else for, they still struggle with this step too. Effective communication is incredibly difficult. So congratulations, technology team. That was an excellent round. We now know conclusively that our data itself has been affected. We have the NSA friend has since gone back to the links because he was very upfront in saying this is no longer my pig or my farm. Simon, whatever favors we have, whatever dirt you seem to think you have on me now no longer exists. Away we go. So compliance team, I'm coming to you, Bruce. Our compliance team now knows conclusively that credit card data has been impacted in this breach. I would very, very highly recommend informing the card brands at this point, which would be our Paper Dragon's ability. But I'll leave it up to you. Surfing in D. Oh, okay. All right. You can have another buff for that one. That one's quite funny, actually. All right. This is a good crowd. This is a really good crowd. Okay, so in light of the fact that Bruce is currently dealing with this resume generating event, he has gone ahead and stipulated we need to inform legal. Excellent. This is a very important thing that just happened. Why do we inform legal before we inform compliance? Here's a good reason. Legal, in this sense, has the ability to tell us what we can be exposed with, whether it's in regards to compliance, whether it's in regards to the personal data. Legal is absolutely an excellent move here. Very nice work, Bruce. Now, how because they charge for every phone call and email that you get sent, usually somewhere around every 7 minutes. So in this case, the conversation of we've been breached, this is what's been impacted, this is how we went about looking at it, here are the players involved, as in all the people involved in this incident. All of that matters to legal. They have a lot of information they need to collate and then unfortunately saddle with their paralegals to deal with on a weekend, but I digress. In this case, doesn't the CISO have to talk to the CFO? Yeah, that's a good point. In this scenario, no, the CFO really isn't a part of this because we have an official CISO. But Sarah, what you've touched on is something very interesting. Sometimes security programs roll up to the CFO instead of the CISO. One of the reasons that has happened, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons that happens is because computers traditionally were accounting tools first. So when computers were starting to roll out in a lot of businesses, you started to see the accounting departments getting them first. So historically, some computer program elements within the business roll up into the CFO office. But because we're maintaining compliance, we are maintaining a very capable security team, and we have some favors that we may have, who knows what we did to get them. We have a CISO who has a seat at the table in the board of directors, so they don't actually need to worry too much about that. But I really like where your head was at with that. Thank you for bringing that up. That was a good one. Okay, so where are we at? We have a great deal of stuff compromised. We now need to start containing this, right? We have some application servers that are looking like they may or may not have been affected. Our terminal servers have been possibly compromised. Still have some investigative actions. I'm just going to go ahead and grant these for the team right now, just so that we can get to the scope of the breach. There's too much activity on this. We're not sure why. All right. Yes. And for what it's worth, Bruce, I'm going to take away your little bonus buff there because that was the resume generating event has put some gray in your temples. We're sorry about that, but it is the way it is. So our application servers look good. We don't have to worry about those, so we can safely ignore them. Our terminal servers do have some malicious indications on them. Those are considerably the footprint on this is enormous. In most cases, it's easier just to pave and replace some of the terminal servers. We don't really have to worry too much about those right now. We have a couple of workstations that need some attention, and we have definitely our database servers. They are compromised. They are having some issues, and of course our web and all the rest. Okay, so I'm going to turn back to our CEO. One of the things that comes up with these public-facing breaches, as in your website is down and nobody's able to do the work, some of your customers have started to reach in and they're very upset. They don't know why they can't get their information that they need. They don't know why they can't get the transactions going through. Some of your pretty high-value clients are, needless to say, a little bit miffed that some of your systems have been down for as long as they have, because some of them rely on this as part of their business, because it isn't necessarily an atomic situation. Your service might further impact some other services. Third-party vendor risk management is very important in nearly every security program. So it might not be a bad time to start having a conversation with some of your high-value clients, in which case we can start this customer interaction. We haven't lost any data yet, have we? We don't know. We have some data compromise, as in somebody has seen the data, which means it's unauthorized, and we do have some disclosure. Now, it's entirely up to you. You don't necessarily have to inform the consumer and the end customers just yet if we don't want to. You can certainly wait on this. This is one of these, you can play the ability as often as you want, but it is one of these other ones that is based off of pure random chance. Yeah, and you're right. We don't want the press to find out until we've got our ducks in a row. So it might not be a good time to pull that one if we're interested in that. Another thing we can do is we can start the process of engaging our compliance team. We've spoken to legal. Legal says, yeah, you can go ahead and have conversations with the card brands. That's part of our requirements. We do need to inform them because this data has been compromised. In which case you can go ahead and run this interpersonal tactics that does allow you the opportunity to have a conversation with compliance ahead of the compliance team and just kind of prime the card brands if you want to. I'll leave it up to you to decide how you want to spend that time. Or you can simply delegate some containment actions down to the technical team. That's also an option. Isn't a delegator when everything's on fire? Yeah, that's a good point. Because if the CEO is having to show up and tell everybody what to do, some layer of management isn't working. So in this case, did you want to inform compliance about as in inform the card brands to, yeah, let them know that this is going? Okay. Okay. So we have officially engaged the card brands in our regulatory compliance overhead. So they are now aware that this is happening. Okay. And they've said, all right, good. Keep working at it. We know that this has been compromised. We'll talk to your legal team and get that information. Everybody's obviously going to send this business a bill. That's a couple of rounds. Yeah. So we're getting close to this 12-hour gap. Okay. So we've been working this incident for 9 hours. When we get to hour 12, the whole team, quote unquote, everybody has to go home, go to bed. Okay. So what we're going to run into here pretty soon is the incident isn't able to work. So given that we've investigated the full scope of it, we may want to consider some containment effort, in which case we have some freebie containment actions. I can't remember where I put those. Here we go. So our compliance team having been former technical, they understand things like firewall controls, tooling, and stuff associated with it. So Bruce, I'm going to come back to you here. Because we've engaged the card brands and we've told them, hey, there is a problem. We are working on it. We do have data compromise. Now we have to stop the bleeding because we only have 3 hours before everybody has to go home and go to bed because we can't simply keep everybody sitting in those seats as long as we have been. So my recommendation, highly, highly recommend running some containment actions so that we can delegate those to the technical team and leverage some of the additional abilities that work hand in hand. I'll leave it up to you to think if you want to do that or update compliance again if you so choose, but keeping in mind that this has quite a cooldown. And it might be good to do this a little later on. Unless Bruce had to leave, in which case I will be the new Bruce. That's fine too. It's sort of whatever it takes. I'm off to the golf course. No problem, Simon. Containment sounds good. Right on. Okay, so we have 2 additional containment efforts, which means relative to incident response, that could be doing things like inserting firewall rules, but we have to know where the traffic is going in order to make that a reality. So that's one piece that we have to keep in mind. If it's a physical asset, we can simply walk up and unplug it and move on. Any of the virtual assets, we can sinkhole them with some virtual networking and segmentation options. So back to my technical team. Now, keeping in mind that you get 2 turns for the sake of 1, it might not be a bad idea because you should have some additional containment efforts. It might not be a bad idea to leverage this incomplete archives because it will give you something to kind of bolster the containment. The more you can contain now, better off these guys. Again, we're close to a point where everybody's going to hit a physical and mental wall. We're going to be breaking more than we're fixing. So I think at this point, if you wanted, one of your turns could leverage the incomplete archives to get you some more containment efforts, but I'll let you debate that between yourselves. Going home after 12 hours. People need sleep, Simon. They have to go to bed sometime. Yeah, that's good. Let's do that. We have an extra 2 additional containment actions. So I count a total of 4. You have another turn that you can invoke if you wish, keeping in mind that it's been a little while since we've had a communication situation. Might not be a bad time to send a status update just in case. Coffee and pizza, and then goes home. Ken, you have the CEO thing wired shut. Communicate. Thank you, Sarah. Let's have a update. The status update contained too much information. Nobody read it. Communication is ineffective. Now, there is no penalty for this, but if the status updates are too lengthy or they contain too much information that isn't relevant to the audience on the other side of it, that can be a problem because then it doesn't get read. One of the consistent kind of human nature gaps that we see in incident response and by extension just operations in general, if the manual is too wordy, it doesn't get read. We run into this situation where the data just doesn't get to its intended target. So it is a consistent problem. It does happen. So given that we've communicated where we're at, we still have some additional containment actions. I highly, highly, highly recommend let's go ahead and start containing some of this activity and see if we can get it. So given that these 2 are public facing and people are consistently trying to hit them, we may want to go ahead and try to contain these first, because if there is any damages to those systems and that damage is allowed to persist into the actual system, the public facing part of the system itself. So if we're thinking something like embedded cross-site scripting, somebody comes to the website, they get something through a drive-by download, we run into a situation where we're infecting our customers, might not be a bad idea to go ahead and start running some of these containments here. So TJ and Sarah, I'll leave it up to you to decide if you want to contain your web servers. Given that our database servers also provide some data and do contain a ton of data, it might not be a bad idea to contain these, especially if the attacker is latent in the network. We want to make sure that they can't continue to exfiltrate this if they have chosen to steal it. Is there any chance that there's a free pen test and we are just overreacting? You should never overreact to a free pen test, Cody. That's probably not a good idea. If it wasn't authorized, I would say that's not overreacting. So we have 4 containment actions. If you want, we can go ahead and try one of these 2 and try either of these 2 as well. Now, when I say try, it isn't a foregone conclusion that you're going to get it all. So it's something to keep in mind. So I'll leave it up to you 2 to decide, do we want to start with a web server or a SQL server? Web server. I agree. Let's look at a web server. Excellent. That one worked out. Okay. Do you want to do another web server? Chop the wires. Do we want to do a web contain another web server? Do we want to try and contain a different one? What did we want to do? Sorry, it's back to TJ and Sarah. Yeah, it's a good idea. A database server might not be a bad thing to try and contain. Let's do that. There we go. So that one worked out too. And you know what? Just because the teams and the jokes are really excellent, I'm going to let you try this one. Oh, identified services are targeted for remote stoppage via a PowerShell script. Some machines fail to execute the script for one reason or another, but you get some free containments now on the other side. So we burned another one. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we have 4 left. But in this case, the technology teams, wow, they're pretty beat. They've been working this the hardest. So we're going to take up. So yeah, very, very close to that situation. I'm back after my political fundraiser. What's going on? Need more pizza? How about Starbucks and fancy food? So trotting out the expense accounts for all the really good quality food is amazing. Usually in most incidents, you're lucky if you get a dish of cold pizza. It's been sitting in the break room since President Taft was around. So yeah, that's awesome. Right on, Simon. In this case, I'm going to go to my operations leads. Why did I want to go to my operations leads? Oh, not yet. I'm coming to you for eradication. That's why. Okay, let's go back. I thought these guys had another one too. I built the game. You'd think I'd remember where I put all this. No. Okay, that's coming up. All right. So let's keep on our technical teams. We still have some containment effort that we can put in place here. So I highly suggest that we try our next web server and maybe our backup server if we choose to, because we've contained both of our SQL servers that we totally test. We've been hogging all the turns. For what it's worth, Sarah, the technical team actually does most of the heavy lifting in incident work. But yeah, it's all good. So I think in this case, I would like to suggest to the technology teams, let's go ahead and see if we can disconnect these 2 boxes from the environment as well, because then we can start to talk about some of the conversations that come with it later on. So yeah, I guess Sarah and TJ, any disagreements in the containing these 2? Yeah, the backup server was one of the first we found compromised. So that's one. That one's good. Okay, that one works. Technology is always great when it runs, right? Excellent. That one's good too. So we've burned 2 more of those. All right. It has been 10 hours and our customers have not been able to purchase anything. Some of them are likely to start showing up in your office spaces. Whether or not you want them there is completely irrelevant. Simon, I think we need to have a conversation about the outage to some extent. Now, keeping in mind that we control the narrative right now, okay? But if it's allowed to languish or persist too long, that can be a bit of a devastating situation. Because we have high-value clients, because we have a lot of B2B involved with this e-commerce thing, we can simply put something on the front page for a lot of our like our consumer layer customers and just say, hey, sorry, system's down for whatever. We can simply put something there. Most of the consumers are just going to carry on. Yeah, we're going to lose that business, but we may not lose any reputation. But the B2B customers that are relying on this service as part of their business, they have answers and questions that are coming in their direction. And they're, of course, yeeting those into your inbox. Whether or not you want them to is irrelevant. So I would highly suggest let's run Business Charming and see if we can maybe placate some of the concerns that are coming from our high value clients. But Simon, I'll leave it up to you to decide in between political fundraisers and Starbucks runs. Oh, that Facebook outage was gold. Turn on the charm. That's it. Oh, this guy, your trust is the most important thing, and working all hands on deck. I'm starting to feel his business. Excellent. So our customer has been successfully updated. Good shape. We don't know whether or not it's useful because we don't really know at the end. It doesn't show up until the end of the session. That's the worst part about an incident, is we are blissfully unaware of what happens. All right. It's now down to the 11th hour, literally. My department manager, Jason, the Facebook outage. We are really coming up to a point where we need to accelerate some of this incident. We have a lot of stuff contained, but one of the things that we might want to consider doing is this resource allocation, where you simply come to the team and you say, yeah, listen, I just need a little bit more gas in the tank. We'll get through to this. Whatever we decide to do is whatever we decide to do. So I will leave it up to you to decide if we want to push the button and get some more bench strength. Illicit drugs. There is no crystal meth in this. It's not how this works. We're not encouraging that. Damn, yeah. No amphetamines. That's an expansion pack. Bring in more people. All right. So as a result of this, we can now proceed into hour 13. Hour 14, because I give you your team the break at 12. You get 2 additional hours that we can delegate down to the technical analyst team. That did cost a turn. So now, technically speaking, everybody goes home to go to bed. That having been said, because we've played this ability, we've gone ahead, we've shuffled some things around. We said, hey, listen, we'll promise you some day off in lieu and maybe some gift cards to help you make it up to the people that you're supposed to see today. Yeah, good question. We now reserve the ability to play another couple of actions. So what we can do is we can either play this birds of a feather and bring somebody in who can help us out kind of at the 11th hour, or in this case, I guess the 12th hour, which would be good. The other side of it is if we bring them in the next day, we might be able to get an incident power up from the other side of it. Keeping in mind, we still have some containment that needs to happen. We still have some eradication that needs to happen, and we have to bring the business back online before we can do that. So might not be a bad idea to bring somebody in if we needed to, but it's kind of late. We're going to have a hard time getting anybody on the phone. No guarantees as to whether or not we're going to play that one. That having been said, again, technical teams, your ability stacks. So because you could bring in a partnership if you wanted to, keeping in mind that the partnerships don't necessarily bring in results right away. So we might be going to a break anyhow, which we can bring them in if we so needed through our incident response assistance process, right? Yeah, phone Ken. Don't phone Ken, he's sleeping. But if we want to keep this going beyond the scope of our time here, they charge a fair clip potentially, so we're not really sure, but we can pick one of these 3 type shops. So a boutique shop is a smaller business, but usually very highly skilled people who are around. In this case, if they're allowed to come in, somebody just needs to be available to help coordinate, be hands on feet, bring them into the business, whatever that looks like. For what it's worth, you can actually make a pretty handsome living doing this. This is kind of a fun part of consulting work if you're into that. So far, your incident cost is $18,000 in lost revenue, but we're about to have a pretty prolonged time before we can go ahead and bring the business back up in line. So if we wanted to bring in some additional incident response help, they will be allowed to continue working the incident while your team goes and gets some much needed rest. So it's I'll leave it up to, in this case, because the department manager went ahead and pushed the button, I'm going to leave it up to Jason to decide if we're going to bring in some incident response help or if we're going to simply leverage our existing technical teams for 2 more turns to try and get something over the line. Yeah, Simon really has this thing nailed. We're going to lose another 18K, people. I want results. I don't want excuses. Bring in the pros. Okay, all right. So we're bringing in the pros. Let's leverage a specialized. Specialized can deliver some really exceptional results if you're willing to pay. Costs are higher, but results can come faster and may include additional findings that can be used to expedite incident remediation. So they are going to show up for the paltry sum of $12,800, which is peanuts relative to what some of them were going to cost otherwise. So excellent. That's a really good one. The other side of it is they are going to deliver results for us in 28 hours. So it might take a while for us to get that to work. In this case, with our last remaining 1 hour, I'm going to suggest our CEO leverage the buck stops here. Basically, it is, hey, listen, I'm the CEO. I'm going to clean this this problem up if I have to. But right now, I had said our biggest customer is on the phone threatening to leave. There is an extra amount of zeros I can put on this check to make it interesting to you. What say you? Insert shop here. So I highly recommend with our last turn, let's go ahead and leverage this. What say you, Simon? I say, yeah, perfect. Yeah, Ken, sorry to answer your question. The annual revenue every year. Excellent. So our teams go home for some much needed rest. We're able to quickly onboard this services provider because they know exactly what they're looking for, what they need to do. No, Ken, please, this is all good. Everybody's here to learn and have fun. That's what we're here to do. Please enjoy. We bring in this team. They're here to help us. They get up to speed very quickly. Our technical teams, because they rock at sending out communication information, and the status update that contained too much information was of value to a fresh incident response team. They come in, they start working it. Everybody's up to speed. All they need is a point person to stick around and be available by phone should anything arise. But other than that, they have the information they need. They're going to start working the incident. So it's been, let's come back. All right. So because CEO managed to talk their CEO and got some very interesting things happening, we have ticked up our current incident costs. It is a little bit expensive, but our intrepid investigators have some information for us. They too had an in-house forensics person who came on, was able to image some of these affected systems and worked very quickly because this is how they spend their time. The benefit of bringing in very specialized shops in and amongst the price is that they deliver really excellent, often very effective work. So as a result, they know how all of the mechanisms of communication happen within the affected systems. They're aware of how the attackers phone outbound and communicate with their command and control servers. They've locked all that to a point, but they cannot go ahead and push the button to contain it all the way because they usually need somebody with the proper amount of access inside the network. Fortunately, your firewall admin, having lost a fair bit of sleep, worried also about this level of resume generating events, was to implement this block. So as a result, we've now successfully fully contained this incident. So now our teams have come back. Everybody's feeling refreshed, sort of, as much as you can in a late incident kind of situation. We've got some time in the books here. It's going to be kind of expensive. We do still have our incident response team. Remember when I mentioned we have bench strength? They are here until the end of the game, until they also need to go home and go to sleep. So we're coming close to the tail end of when they need to go because they've been working all night. So we do have another couple of rounds with them, and I won't hesitate to introduce that if I need to. So now we're at the eradication phase. We've gone ahead and identified the scope of the breach. We have contained all of the affected assets. None of the evil can communicate outbound, but now we have to start finding evil. So one of the things that our team did, our incident response team did, the the outsourced one, was they did come in and they said, we think we found some of these mechanisms of persistence. We have found, some interesting information. So as a result, we now get a couple of free eradication actions. I'm going to go to the department managers. In the process of understanding the eradication effort that needs to take place, we need to understand what's supposed to be there and what isn't. That's a common problem that we have. So in this case, our outsourced provider spoke with the department managers and said, hey, we found some suspect things. We're not quite sure. Would you be able to go ahead and take a look? So department managers, Jason, again, would you like to go ahead and just review this list to determine if this is, quote, not one of ours, to possibly get some additional free eradication actions that we can pass down to our technology teams? I'll let you decide. Unless Jason had to go, in which case I'm the department manager now. Oh, yeah, sir. I wasn't sure if you caught that. Did you want to play this not one of ours ability and potentially get some additional eradication effort to help our technical teams do this a little better at scale? Yes, not one of ours. Let's see. All right, so 2 freebies. So we have 4 free eradication efforts. Back to my technology teams. I don't think you have anything of value here, surprisingly. You don't. Nope. Maybe I'll build one of those. I'm going to jot that down. The best part about just coming out of beta, I'm still finding all kinds of cool things. Okay. So technical team, do you want to start the eradication process on our primary facing web servers? That might not be a bad idea. We can also start the eradication process on our database servers, because knowing the amount of data that might need to get replicated and addressed inside of that time frame, it can take a while for that to replicate and build back up to a point of being useful, especially with these large-scale databases. So I'll leave it up to TJ and Sarah to decide. I recommend either running eradication actions across these 2 devices, your prod SQL and prod web, keeping in mind that one action does not necessarily guarantee success. So I'll leave it to you to think through that. Can we start with the DB and move on to the web? That is a good idea. But I'll wait for consensus on this one. And we're shooting from the hip. Oh, Sarah, music to my ears. As long as the last action is communicate. Wonderful. The service was stopped, but now it's started again. Someone didn't set it to stopped, then manual startup. Eradication is ineffective. When we are talking services, especially in a Windows environment, most of them are set to start up again by automatic, right? So when the server gets rebooted and comes back, that's one of the ways that it maintains persistence. That said, attackers leverage the same concern. They will go ahead and insert themselves into services or create services that are just set to automatically start up, because we didn't set that to disabled entirely, or because we didn't set it to a manual startup where we have to manually go in and click. We now have a situation where we need to try again. So I am going to let you try again on this database server, just because as long as we communicate at the end was excellent. Unfortunately, this didn't work out very well. Helpful help desk Hank created a domain admin account for someone on the phone, but he can't recall their name. Technology team loses 2 turns looking for suspect accounts. Department managers lose 1 turn coaching Hank on proper handling of admin accounts. Damn you, Hank. In this case, now we have to communicate that. And oof, that's a rough go. So let's lose turns. I hate Hank. Everybody hates Hank, right? Apologies to anybody on the chat who's officially named Hank. I promise you the naming convention was purely for the alliteration and not for any offense in that direction. Okay. One thing that's come up, legal has gotten back to us and said, hey, compliance is wondering where we're at. The business is clearly still down because they can go ahead and determine that. Hank is the CEO's nephew. Oh man, Simon, you're nailing it here. Okay, so you can have another buff for that one. That's too funny. Yeah, absolutely. In this case, the the compliance team has gone ahead and said, listen, we need to update our card brands because legal's pestering us, and when legal pesters us, it gets very expensive. So Bruce, I'm coming to you here. Do we maybe want to leverage paper dragons to see if we can get some compliance feathers unruffled a little? As Bruce is, damn you, Hank. Don't be a Hank. Paper dragons. That's right. Let's do it. Excellent. Okay, so we've updated compliance. They're happy. Our intrepid incident responders are about to head home, so they're calling it a day. We're on our own for now until we decide to either invoke another favor from another friend. We'll go ahead and hang on to those, though, because I think it's going to be pretty good here pretty soon. Okay, so in this case, our department managers, we still have this not one of ours, and we want to leverage more eradication efforts. So let's consider not one of ours again. So Jason, I'm coming back to you. Do we want to leverage this? Because remember, our technical teams are still dealing with the account issues. So we definitely want to get your buy-in as to figure this out. Good policy on paper always stops the bad things from happening. You guys in these security jokes, this is awesome. Yeah, I'm going to suggest we go with not one of ours because in this case, we need more eradication actions. We've confirmed that we have malicious accounts, possibly that an attacker may or may not be using for a mechanism of persistence. So that did for us. We get 4. Oh my goodness. Okay, 2, 3, and 4. Excellent. All right. Back to my technical teams, let's continue the eradication process. So both of our database servers still need to be eradicated. In this case, because of the nature of how this is and how long this incident has progressed, I really, oh my goodness. In this case, I'm going to suggest that we burn our eradication actions, trying them across the plant to see if we can close that down and get the attacker out of here. But again, I will leave it up to TJ and Sarah just to confirm. Data classification project. What? Come on. It's all classified. That's right. Yeah, eradicating them all. Let's try and nuke everything from orbit. I agree. Let's try and clear this out. TJ, any objections? We're gonna run your eradication actions. We're gonna grind them out and see if we can do that. Nope. Let's do it. So your database server there. Okay. Well, it turns out the coaching did work for Hank, and we managed to catch that in advance. I'm not gonna saddle you with foolishness for too long. There we go. Some files and likely persistence methods were identified, but mixed in with known functionality. Eradication effective, but it costs 2 turns hunting it down. Again, I'm not going to saddle you with that, but that's a real problem in that there's too much on a system. We're not quite sure what's good, bad, or ugly. There's definitely more than enough things out there that look suspicious without actually being suspicious. Let's take a look at your other Sql server here too. Excellent. Malicious files and attacker methods are successfully removed. So that server is officially clean and good to go. Given that you still have some eradication actions, I would like to heavily suggest your backup server because that will help you in the recovery phases coming up here very shortly. So not to point you in too fine of a direction, but let's go ahead and maybe consider this. What say you, tech team? Yeah, I forgot about the backup server. Yeah, everybody forgets the backup server. All right, I'm going to let you keep shooting on this one until you hit it. Treat it like a sand game. Yeah, all right, that works. Ooh, but it costs the ops leads 2 turns hunting down the business impact. Well, poor ops leads haven't really had much to do. I'm going to go ahead. Where's my CISO? Adam. Let's leverage this battering ram to keep our operations teams working effectively because right now our operations leads are basically spending a bunch of time chasing some of the stuff down. The CISO goes, nah, I can go ahead and hunt this down for you. I can talk to the business units and get back to work. All right. So that did cost us an leads. You have some free eradication actions if you want. Ramming speed. Yes. Daniel Simpson Day. No records of any kind. Those are my favorite jokes. So my ops team here, Vincent, Ben, do you want to go ahead and just do it and go through the eradication piece just to make sure that we can maybe close off some of this and bring the incident back up to bring the business back online? What say you? Let's do it. All right. Okay, so you get some free eradication actions. And in this case, given that this is ticked up to where I do want us to get to the end, I, as the incident manager, have inserted myself into this process. The various favors and buffs that Simon had cultivated by being the true example of a hysterical stereotype CEO have now made it so that the NSA the favors that were owed from the NSA friend, yeah, it turns out they weren't quite even, and there was some mechanisms ahead. So they actually managed to pull in a fair amount of agency resources, and to the point where we have gone ahead. But this makes us even, was what was said on the way out the door, as in, okay, we've gone ahead, we've cleaned everything up. I can no longer abuse government resources for personal gain. Wink, wink. In this case, we now have an environment that's 100% free of the attacker. We can conclusively determine that because we knew all the mechanisms of persistence. We followed the process of identifying the full scope of the breach, and because we made it in such a way that our systems could be brought back online safely. So we've successfully contained everything. Now, where are we at? So our backup server, everything is back to normal. Where's our compliance team? Compliance. We told you to put that there. This is one of these situations where the compliance team went ahead and validated that the existence for good security controls was needed. And by extension, they have gone ahead and granted some benefits to backup and recovery. However, I'm going to go ahead and leverage this ability, Bruce, in your stead, just for posterity purposes here and to move the game along a little bit. One of the things we fought for was excellent backup resiliency. Okay, data resiliency is really important in organizations, regardless of what you're doing. Knowing that a pile of our data had been compromised, we can't confirm or deny that that's a concern relative to the threat. So we want to make sure that we have some nice, clean data because we've put it in two places, because our compliance team won a boardroom battle where, you know, printers were left off the budget cycle in favor of some level of automated patching systems. We now actually have the ability to bring all our boxes back online automatically, thanks to some of the efforts that went in from our unsung heroes in the compliance team. So the business is back up and running. We have one more thing left to do, and that's simply to communicate that the business is back online. And now we're there. Okay. So that's it. We're back online. But how do you do, right? What fun is a game if there's no, if we're not keeping score? Let's have a look. So our total incident hours were 28 hours across the whole board. Okay. And so at a cost per hour of $1,500 for revenue, the total lost revenue is $42,000. Okay, so when we look at the labor hours here that were spent, this is across all of the teams, right? Keeping in mind that teams had multiple versions, multiple people working on this. Rarely in an incident are you working by yourself unless you're in a very, very small organization, in which case, yeah, do please take care of yourself. Our our services providers, we got a steal of a deal at $12,800 for those really highly specialized people. Again, we must have called in some favors, or the buck stop here was very, very effective from our CEO. In any case, we have a steal of a deal on really excellent incident processes here, so good job. Our compliance handling effectiveness, 77% successful, which means there is some fine as a result of it, because we had some controls that were out of compliance. This data that was compromised was exfiltrated, which shouldn't be possible inside of a cardholder data environment. We had some controls that were out of compliance despite being in compliance. We have a considerable problem to clean up after as a result of this. So our total incident costs, $77,800 when we factor in our fines, our service provider, and lost revenue. Now, because we spent a good bunch of time talking to our high-level customers, they managed to stick around, but 25% of them aren't coming back. This is a very real problem. Inside of many businesses that experience a breach, depending on the stats and where you look, it is going to be about a 20% loss. That adds up, right? That 20% of a business is quite expensive. So when we're talking 13 million, that really adds up on an annual basis. But we managed to keep 75% of our customers. We're in good shape. Yeah, no bonuses for anybody except Simon this year, right? But our total data loss, 200 gigs. So for what it's worth, 200 gigs of personal information, credit card data, that's a substantial amount of data. That's probably the whole database at that point, depending on the way it's configured and how many customers we truly have. So we definitely get some log deletions. No, do not delete the log data. Oh, you guys, you're killing me. This is hilarious. Yeah, please don't delete the log data. It's very important, especially if it has good telemetry. But 200 gigs of credit card data left the building. So chances are what we're going to be faced with on the tail end of this is some really tough conversations with our acquiring banks and the card brands that might be represented as part of this too. So it isn't necessarily a foregone conclusion that we're entirely out of the woods. In this case, we are in a position where we're going to have some considerable issues. So I have a couple of last minute things here just to present, and then I will call it a day for everybody. So let me get this back up here. Ask Hank to do it. He's helpful. There's the finger pointing. Yeah. Poor Hank is now sleeping with the fishes because some of the other favors go both ways. So let's have a debrief. One of the things I mentioned in this whole process was you need the lessons learned in the postmortem. Obviously, we aren't a real company. Obviously, we're not going to be making any firm business decisions based off of this. So I'm just simply going to render this here. Did you all have fun? Did you enjoy what we were doing, even though this might have been slightly panic-inducing? If, for what it's worth, if you genuinely did feel any panic, I apologize. I promise you, no ones and zeros were truly hurt in the process of this. But this is the idea. The idea is to practice these in a non-impacting situation so that we can determine response capability within the teams, security control gaps, potential compliance fines, the process in general. How often should we be communicating? How often, when do we get legal engaged? Do we have a PR firm if we have to go public? What does all of this look like? This is the whole point of the game, is to elicit some of these questions among the various parts of the business. When we practice these concepts, the teams get better, right? That's how it works. So while this was a simulated incident, the problems were real life. I mean, companies lose hundreds of gigs of data all the time. And it never goes reported because most of the time they don't have a duty to report that. We are starting to see that change. We are starting to see jurisdictions that have mandatory breach reporting laws. However, that is still emerging as we go through. But in this case, the costs and the net impact are considerably higher. So when we factor in something like credit restitution, right? So in this case, because 200 gigs of credit card data walked out the door, we probably have a considerable amount of credit card data restitution that has to happen to our customers, depending on how depending on how many users were affected and the kind of plan you can negotiate, you're probably looking at about $10 per user per month. So when you scale that up to, a few thousand users, that is definitely one of those situations where you're looking in the millions of dollars. Another thing to keep in mind is insurance, right? If you have insurance, the insurance plan might not actually cover this part of the breach, that part of the breach, or the breach at all. One thing we are finding is the market is hardening for breach response and insurance. So we might be in this situation where your policy doesn't cover the 10 million bucks your organization has to spend to restore all of that and everything else. It adds up pretty fast. All right, so this wouldn't be a session if I didn't leverage some kind of shameless self-promotion. This is a service that I run. This is actually what you've experienced is a business-facing service that I offer. The way I built this is inside of your organization, I can take in your asset inventories, your incident response plans, any of the specific elements that go into it, and come up with a bespoke instance of a game just for your business, focusing on a relevant threat case that you can expect based on public-facing intelligence. If you have PCI compliance mandates to attest to on an annual basis, requirement 12.10.2 stipulates every year that you at least have to do this. This will count, right? So for anybody with PCI in scope, this 100% applies because everybody I've reached out to on that side went, what? There's no guidance for this, which means this works. And in the event they try and fight me, well, then whatever, we'll go from there. But at the end of the day, this does count as validating requirement 12.10.2. Similarly, within the PCI space and other security compliance and even just good security practice, this does count as security awareness training. One of the parts of this service, you get the short and condensed version given the size of the conference. But one of the things that this service provides is either security awareness training at the front of it, where we talk about some general security concepts that are applicable to the business, or if there's already a security awareness service inside the business that's working really well for you and your teams, no problem. Instead of the awareness training, we simply do a case study around breaches in your industry, potentially even some of your competitors. That's not for me to determine, obviously, but the breaches that are focused in your industry based on the threat cases you can expect and those outcomes. So then it becomes a discussion of, oh, if we were wrapped up in this, we could expect some similar outcomes. That helps to put a bit of gravity around the incident as well. But in the event that you're missing your asset inventories, IR plans, or they don't exist, that's okay, because we have a lot of systems in place currently that allow us to do this for you in a frictionless fashion. So our frictionless security foundation service will have this all sorted out for you pretty quickly. All you have to do is provide some upfront information that you would have to provide in order to make the game effective anyway. So in the pursuit of running that information down, we can handle some of the back-end paperwork for you and include some other notification services as well to let you know, hey, your documentation's a little old. It's going to be worthwhile for you to evaluate it. Here's some things to keep in mind. So we can take out a lot of the guesswork. So if you're interested in more, feel free to reach out, info@syntaxsecurity.ca. Our website, security-selfawareness.com. It has just gone live, so please go take a look. It's all right. It's not bad. I like it. I think it's cool. There's going to be more to come on that, right? I'm looking to build a blog out for this where I can start to share incident response tools, security tips, whether it comes to any of this. Absolutely, this is something available. And if you want to reach out to me over LinkedIn and you want to stay connected, I'm in there under Anthony Leece. But yeah, you can call me AJ. We're all friends here. It's all good. So feel free to do so. And with that, I'm going to open it up to any Q&A. And if you want to go somewhere else and start your Friday early, please don't hesitate to do so. I really want to thank everybody for being on this, spectators and participants. I had a lot of fun. I hope you had a lot of fun. I really enjoyed playing with everybody today. I hope everybody learned something, and we're away to the races.